Welcome to Highly Sensitive, Happily Married, the podcast that teaches you to not only have an easier marriage as a sensitive woman, but to have one that feels more amazing by the day. Where you'll hear relatable stories, love advice that works, and coaching on how to have a marriage where feeling upset and disconnected is a thing of the past, and where instead a sense of loving connection and even fun and lightness is the norm. I'm Hannah Brooks, highly sensitive person, love expert, and marriage coach, and I'm so happy to be on this journey with you. Hello, and welcome to episode 10. How fun, episode 10. It's been such a pleasure. It's so much fun for me to bring you these episodes every week, and it's been a ton of fun also to hear all the really great positive feedback. Just so fun. I know that this podcast is helping so many people. And if you have thoughts or feedback for me, or you just want to share how it's been helping you, feel free to leave a review. That's one of the only ways that I hear from you, unless you head over to the podcast site on my website. There's usually a blog post. Actually, there's always a blog post that you can actually comment. You can leave comments there. But hearing reviews is such a wonderful way for me to know you're out there, you're listening, you're getting something from this. So please leave a review. It means a lot to me. All right. So I hope you're doing well. I hope you are not feeling too much annoyance these days. I know that the holiday season can be a time where we do feel more annoyance. I am doing really well. I've been finding so much more enjoyment this year with my family, with my husband. I just don't feel nearly as much irritation and annoyance as I used to. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Annoyance and irritation. I hear it from my clients and people in my community all the time. And it's an area I get a lot of questions on is like, how can I stop feeling so annoyed? Because I feel so annoyed. I feel so irritated. He gets on my nerves, right? It's a very, very common experience in a relationship, especially if you're a normal, highly sensitive person. You will feel irritated and annoyed at your significant other sometimes, and maybe a lot of sometimes, right? It really is something that many of us experience, and many of us really struggle with in our relationships. And I think it might be. Actually, I'm not even going to say might. It's definitely something that might be even more, feel more problematic or more common in these times, right? In love in the time of COVID, right? Because perhaps one of your very few or only social outlets is being with your partner, right? Being around someone so much naturally can lead to a bunch of irritation and annoyance. Right? Even in normal times. And even in normal times when you're not around your partner a ton, there are many reasons for feeling, for this emotion of irritation or annoyance to come up in you, especially for highly sensitive people. And I guess that's the bad news that I have for you today. I don't think as highly sensitive people, we're ever going to be able to fully escape feeling annoyed and irritated at moments. And I'll say this, I've said this before, I'll say it again, like we as human beings, not even as highly sensitive humans, but we as humans are not going to be able to escape having emotions, the full spectrum of emotions, right? It's part of the package of being human, but we can make it easier on ourselves when we experience annoyance or other negative, quote unquote, negative emotions. And we can make it easier on our relationship. And I want to dive into some of the reasons why we highly sensitive people do feel annoyed and irritated a bunch, and also some of the solutions, some of the ways that we can make it less of a problem, and not have it come up so often. Because, you didn't get married to feel annoyed a lot, right? Right? I doubt that you want to be feeling annoyance or irritation. It doesn't feel good. right? I'm sure that you'd much prefer to be experiencing more love and just enjoying being with the person you signed up to spend your life with. Yeah. So I want to share first, before I dive into some of those solutions, like why we highly sensitive people might experience it often. And I think that the most clear reason is that because we see everything, we see details, right? We process stimulation really deeply as highly sensitive people. So little things stand out to us, little good things, little bad things. And, things that might not bother someone else can actually become overwhelming to us or stressful to us or frustrating or annoying to us, right? So, because we're seeing all the little things, we're aware of subtleties, of course, we're going to see flaws more too, right? So, we're going to see ways in which our partner does things or is a way in which he is that bothers us. We're going to see that more. Right? So we also, all of us, I've mentioned this before, and you may have heard it elsewhere, but we all, having a human brain, we all have something in our brain that is called the negativity bias. It's strong in all of us. It means that we have a tilt in the human brain, a bias towards the negative. We see more of the negative naturally. That's sort of the default setting of the brain. And again, it may be, and I've seen literature on this, that it's actually stronger, this negativity bias, in highly sensitive people. I don't know if that's 100% true. It does seem that could be the case in my work with clients. I noticed that there's a lot of negativity bias, but it also really might just be that we see details, right? And the small things can loom large to us, and we feel our feelings more strongly. And so therefore, a little thing that might slightly bother someone else really bothers us, right? So yeah, we have this bigger and potentially more common or often experience of annoyance or irritation. We cannot escape the fact of our sensitivity, right? And the way that we sensitives are more aware of things or do take in more of what's around us in our environment, right? But we can stop making that, the fact of that, create so much annoyance. And we can stop making annoyance itself problematic for ourselves and our marriages. Because what I have noticed time and again is the way that we handle annoyance, the way we deal with it by sort of default, is that we make it even worse. We tend to get annoyed that we are annoyed. We get frustrated that we are annoyed. We get angry and we feel guilty about being annoyed. You know what I mean? And then what happens is that we have a boatload of negative emotion between us and our ability to feel love and ability to enjoy our partner. Right? So that all that negative emotion that comes from being annoyed at our annoyance keeps us from feeling the kinds of feelings we'd prefer to be feeling, right? We really cannot connect to our love when we have annoyance like a wall in front of us. So the good news is there's a lot that you can do to no longer let annoyance and irritation feel like a wall between you and the experience you want to have in your marriage. So, I personally have had lots of experience with annoyance, and particularly so, some of you will resonate with this at certain times of month. I've had it in both of my marriages. I felt annoyance a fair amount in both of my marriages, and I used to think it was a really big problem. I used to think maybe that it meant I would never feel the love and passion that I wanted to feel for my husband, that I would never like being around him again. right? And, nowadays I have a very different relationship with annoyance. That new relationship that I have with it is allowed for me to have so much more enjoyment of my husband and of my own self. Now, this does not mean I never feel annoyance. I still do sometimes. One example is my husband is a big talker. This is one of the things that drew me to him. He loves to talk and share stories. And I think it's kind of ironic that now one of the things that annoys me about him at moments is his talkativeness. And it's funny too, because in my first marriage, one of the things that annoyed me was that my first husband was not a talker. He was very quiet. Pushed on my irritation buttons too. So that's just one of the signs that irritation isn't necessarily because of the person who you feel annoyed by. It's about something that's going on inside of you. So in any case, sometimes my husband we like to read at night. We both are book readers. We lie in bed and read. And sometimes he loves to when he gets into a book, he loves sharing quotes from the books. He's like, "Ooh, can I read this to you? Ooh, can I read this to you?" And, sometimes I just want to read my book and be left totally undisturbed. So when he gets in those places of wanting to share, I can feel that annoyance come up, right? And sometimes sometimes it's not just that. Sometimes I can even experience it for sort of prolonged periods of time, not super long, but for part of a day here and there. But like I said, this is no longer a problem for me. And I want to share with you today some of the ways that I work with this, with my annoyance and that I've had my clients work with it to great success so that it doesn't cause problems for you and more negative emotion for you, and so that it doesn't stick around for nearly as long for you. Okay, so here are 4 ways that you can deal with your irritation so it stops being a problem and stops making things worse in your marriage. So you can ultimately really enjoy being married to the person you're with and enjoy your life instead of constantly feeling annoyed. All right, so the first tidbit I want to share with you is to catch your primal brain, catch your mind telling you stories about what that feeling of annoyance and irritation means. Okay, this is a big one. So our human brain is a meaning-making machine. It loves to interpret things, and it tends to love to interpret things in a negative way. If you missed episode 6, go back and listen to that. That's such a good basis for understanding this more deeply. But basically, our annoyance gets worse. It gets exacerbated when we let our brain make it mean something about our relationship being bad. Right? Like when we tell ourselves that, oh no, this annoyance means something's going wrong with our relationship. Right? I hear this all the time from clients and people in my community. A lot of women worry that when they feel annoyance, it means something's going wrong in their relationship, or things are bad between them and their partner. I think behind this is this idea, this belief that we should always feel good in a healthy relationship. And if we don't, it means something is wrong with someone, right? Him, you, the combination of you. It's like if I feel irritated, something must be wrong with my husband, or something must be wrong with me or with us, right? So that's what I mean by our brain makes things mean something. We have thoughts about what annoyance means, right? Yikes, something must be wrong with me and my ability to love. I knew that was a big one for me. What if this means that I'll never feel good with my husband again? That was a big one for me too. Sometimes that one still pops up for me. Or maybe it means he's an annoying person and I made a mistake in marrying him, right? Maybe you resonate with some of these thoughts. But when you're thinking these kinds of things, when your primal brain is interpreting the fact that you feel annoyed to mean these catastrophic things, like the relationship is just doomed, right? You feel bad Tell me where I'm wrong. It's adding pain to the annoyance. It's adding fear and regret and guilt and, terror to the experience of being annoyed. So I like to think about this as like imagine that you have some kind of food that you don't like. Like for me, I really am not a big beef eater. So I would imagine like a slab of a hamburger, right? So I've got this experience, this hamburger that I just don't like eating. And then I'm like, oh, I know. I'll pour on some fish oil, which I was thinking about what's the grossest thing. I'll pour on some fish oil. Fish oil is pretty gross to me. So I'll just add a little fish oil to this beef and that will like solve things, right? It's kind of like what your brain does when it's interpreting, annoyance to mean all these awful things. It's like adding grossness to the grossness, right? Like don't do that, okay? Why do we do that? I don't know. Our brain does that, but let's teach it to stop. Okay? Because, having that kind of thought go through our mind, like, oh, maybe it means this. Like, that's kind of, it's automatic that will happen. But we do not have to believe those thoughts. We do not have to be like, oh, yeah, it probably means that. It probably means we should just get divorced, that I feel annoyed a lot. Right? We don't have to believe that. We can question those thoughts. We can question the interpretation our brain has. Like, is it true that I'll never feel good with him again? Absolutely not is usually the answer. I mean, I've proven that over and over again for myself. I mean, that was a big one, like I said before, like, does this mean I'll never feel good with him again? That's kind of what my brain wants to make it mean sometimes when I feel annoyed with him. And I question that. And the answer is clearly, of course, this feeling of annoyance that I'm having now does not mean I will always feel annoyed with him, right? Of course not. When we kind of take those thoughts into our sort of more conscious awareness, we can question them, and usually we'll find that they're just like boogeymen in the closet. They're like ghosts. They're not real, right? So my suggestion to you here is to notice what you're making your annoyance and irritation mean. You can even just ask, what story am I telling myself about what this means, right? And then see those thoughts and examine the truth in them, right? And I want to add a couple thoughts here to help you sort of replace those fears with these other kinds of thoughts. Annoyance is not bad in and of itself. And most relationships, honestly, are big enough to have space to hold that annoyance sometimes. Right? Just because you feel annoyed, it really does not mean that the relationship is bad or something's terribly wrong. It really doesn't mean that. I know your brain's going to try to tell you that. It does not mean that. I like to say a healthy relationship is like an ocean, right? It can hold a white cap here and there. It can hold quite a few white caps, right? It does not mean the sea is bad, the sea is destroyed. It does not mean that. Right? The sea is big enough. It can totally hold those little white caps. So, annoyance in and of itself does not mean anything about who your husband is as a person, whether you love him or not, or whether you're meant to be together. Really take that in. So the next way, number 2 way to deal with emotion, with your annoyed feelings more effectively, is to accept it. And I want you to know this is very related to the last step. To accept annoyance as part of the human experience, as part of the highly sensitive person experience. You will, like I said earlier, you will feel annoyed sometimes. And, as women, especially, I find that we feel annoyed at certain times of month. Yeah. Or if you're going through perimenopause, right? It's normal. And, you will probably feel more annoyance when you spend tons of time with your partner because that's just kind of how it is when we spend tons of time with people. But really, know that this is part of the human experience. The interesting thing is we've all been taught that we should feel good. We should feel happy all of the time. And it's really an unconscious aspiration. We do have brains that are wired to avoid pain and seek pleasure, right? So we want that. We want to feel good. But the reality is that's not life. It's not realistic to not feel, or sorry, I should say this. It's not realistic to feel happy all the time. It's not realistic to feel good all the time. And it might not even be what we truly want. And I'm going to share more on this on a separate podcast, but negative emotion, for now, I just want to say negative emotion is appropriate and healthy sometimes. Like, obviously, we don't want to be in it all the time, but 50% of the time, a third of the time, that's very normal for all humans to have that. It's a part, like negative emotion, all emotion, every single human emotion is part of the colorful tapestry of human experience. So I know that this might not feel like great news to you. You might not love hearing this, but the truth is that when you start to accept that all emotions are a natural and normal and even healthy part of being human, you will feel more at peace with it when it does come up. And that's the point. To feel more peace with the discomfort of negative emotion. All right. So some of this really has to do with just shifting the way you think about accepting it. Accepting it comes from shifting the way you are thinking about it, right? So what I suggest for you is to include in your definition of a healthy relationship experiences of feeling annoyed, right? I'm not suggesting that you choose more annoyance or you don't work on kind of uprooting the underlying cause of it. I think that's really important, good work. But just accepting that you will feel annoyance and irritation if you are human. And I bet you are, if you're listening to this. So, one of the way that I like to deal with this is like, when we do feel annoyed, I think it's a great idea to be like, oh, here's the feeling of annoyance again. Kind of like, hey, old friend, I see you, right? And to tell yourself these words, nothing has gone wrong here. For me, I love to tell myself that, like, oh, okay, here's annoyance. This doesn't mean anything's going wrong. It's just part of being human, right? So I remind myself humans feel annoyed around other humans sometimes, no matter who that other person is, right? I'm not supposed to feel great around my husband 100% of the time. And I think that always makes it easier for me to experience annoyance. It's just not as big a deal anymore, right? And the next piece with this is to actually allow yourself to feel the feeling. Instead of like, no, don't want to feel that feeling, go away feeling, right? That's adding that's adding resistance to the feeling of annoyance, which again is like adding fish oil to your gross hamburger, right? So I invite you to allow yourself to feel it. And I'm going to go into depth on what this means someday in one of these podcasts. But for now, I invite you to listen into episode 4 if you haven't already, or go back to it if you have. There's a process in there that will help you find more peace with the experience of annoyance, like letting yourself feel the annoyance so that you can feel more peace with it. I myself and many of my clients have learned how to relax around feeling annoyance. And what happens then, which is the wonderful news, which feels so much better, is that we actually when we start to feel more relaxed around annoyance, we actually stop adding stress to our system, right? Because when we're feeling annoyed, we're actually kind of increasing the stress in our system. So when we take away some of that stress from our system because we're relaxing around feeling our annoyance, we actually reduce the annoyance that we experience naturally, right? We feel more annoyed when we're stressed. So when we take some of that stress out of our system, it helps the annoyance dissipate, okay? So all these things that I've been sharing are helping you to relax around feeling annoyance, right? So it really takes some of the suffering out of feeling that annoyance, ultimately allowing you to feel like a few levels better, right? And when you feel a few levels better, you can then examine the source of the annoyance, which is the next tip for you. So tip 3, understand where the annoyance is coming from. I like to say, like, look at what's under those feelings. Like, what's the cause? So annoyance really comes from, I think many of us sort of get confused and think, oh, annoyance comes from him. Like, it's all his fault, right? Like, he keeps interrupting me. Therefore, annoyance is coming from him. But like, it's very interesting to just note, like for me, in certain times of month, premenstrual times of month, I get annoyed more, right? He can be doing the exact same thing. And like, he can be interrupting me while I'm reading my book and it won't bother me at certain times of month, whereas other times it will. Again, that means that the experience comes from something going on in me. By the way, kind of an important side note is that I call this owning my power, because if I'm the one where my annoyance is coming from, I can change it. If he is the one where my annoyance is coming from, I'm helpless to do anything about it except just suffer through, right? So if those feelings are coming from something going on inside of me, where exactly are they coming from in me? What's going on in me that has me feeling that way? What I find very commonly with myself and my clients is that our feelings of annoyance come from judgments, judgmental thinking, such as when we think, he should be doing this, he should be more like us, or he isn't doing it the way I would, right? There kind of is this thing in us humans that tends to see our way as the right way and the other person's way as the wrong way. A part of us that sort of doesn't accept differences very easily. And we can just look around at our society and know this to be very true, right? But it shows up in our intimate relationships, and it can be kind of subtle, but it's usually there. It's not your fault. It's just part of how humans are wired. So when we're feeling annoyed, it's oftentimes because we're resisting or not accepting the differences in this person who is our partner. We're thinking they should be more like us. And that creates a friction inside of us because it's really a fight with the reality, right? We're fighting with the truth of what is. And that's always going to feel like a fight. Byron Katie has a great quote, which is like, when you fight with reality, you always lose, but only 100% of the time. It feels pretty awful to be in a fight with reality. It feels very frustrating and annoying. So, an example of this would be the kinds of thoughts that we have sort of below the surface of our conscious awareness is like, he should talk more. Like that would have been a thought that I had, a judgment that I had way back in my first marriage. Or, one of my clients the other day, she was like, she had this judgment pop into her mind, which was that her husband should remember not to walk in front of the TV when she was watching it, right? And, for me the other day, my husband came in while I was meditating in the morning. And I was like, in my mind, I was like, I'm annoyed. He shouldn't interrupt me when I'm meditating, right? Or, another big one's like, he shouldn't be so defensive, right? So where are your he shouldn'ts or he shoulds, right? Where are you shoulding your partner? Even if you're not telling him, where are you thinking he should be different than he is? When you're shoulding, that's a form of judgment, judging. When we're judging something, we will feel annoyance and irritation, guaranteed, or maybe frustration, or even anger, okay? So I am not saying you should not want your partner to be different. I think that's fairly normal. But every time that we think he should be different or do it differently, we will feel all those feelings, right? And when we're feeling annoyed or frustrated or irritated or angry, usually then we create harder experiences for ourselves from there, right? Like I like to say, we can be a bit annoying when we are annoyed. Like think about it. How do you behave when you're annoyed? My clients report to me that they criticize or snap at their partner or say judgy things or, tell him to do it differently, demand him to be different, right? Tell him to get to doing the dishes, right? Like we tend to not be our best selves when we're feeling annoyed. which is also okay. It's okay to not always be your best self. You're just not going to have the great experiences that you want when you're acting from that annoyed place, right? Like the client that I was just sharing about whose husband walked in front of the TV, for example, like she, for a few moments after that, she was feeling annoyed and she said something to her partner and from that place of annoyance. And she really, what happened was she missed out on enjoying the TV show she was watching because she ended up feeling, she was thinking about how annoyed she was and feeling annoyed and thinking how he shouldn't have done that and then feeling a little guilty about the whole thing, right? Missing out on precious moments to enjoy herself. So my sort of action tip for you here is to ask yourself, how are you believing he should be? Like, what do you believe he should be doing or not doing, right? And then when you have a little bit of a list of that, or even just one of the ways you think you should do it differently, ask yourself, when I think that, how do I feel? And just notice how your judging thought, how your should thought creates that feeling. Creates usually that feeling of frustration or annoyance or irritation, all right? Just really explore that for yourself. Like, don't take my word for it. Like, I want you to actually experience it yourself. So good. Such a good self-awareness exercise. All right. Last tip for you is that, this really brings me to what could have been my very first guidance on this for you, but I'm going to offer it here. Our sense of annoyance is in direct proportion to the amount of self-care we give ourselves. Okay? Say it again. Annoyance is in direct proportion to the amount of self-care we get. Right? Our primal brain, our oh so helpful in love primal brain, rears its very judgmental, negatively focused head when we are overstimulated or depleted. I've known this all my life. My mom was always very good at reminding me when I hadn't gotten enough sleep because I was so grouchy, right? So like that was me being depleted. As a little girl, it was so obvious. I was such a grouch when I didn't get enough sleep. And that is pretty much true still. But, not getting enough sleep is not the only way that we get depleted, right? As highly sensitive people, it's very easy for us to become overstimulated, overwhelmed. And that is another one of the big reasons why we end up feeling annoyance and irritation a fair amount, right? So a sign for us that we haven't been creating enough replenishment time for ourselves or time alone is when we feel annoyed. Another way of putting that is it's a signal when you feel annoyance to give yourself more decompression time. If you are annoyed at your partner, chances are you are depleted. And I like to say rest and play are the remedy, right? So in other words, if you feel annoyed, try adding in some more self-care. So many ways to do that, and I will go into much more depth on this in an upcoming episode. But for now, add in some self-care if you find yourself in annoyance a fair amount. So those are the 4 tips for you today. And I want to make sure to note that doing all of these things for ourselves that I've just suggested doesn't mean that you don't also, or at certain moments, make requests or ask your husband if he wouldn't, if he could, do something slightly different. Like there's always place for making requests. I think that's lovely and important, right? For me, like when my husband starts interrupting me when I'm reading at night, of course I'm going to ask him, do you mind keeping your thoughts to yourself for a little while? I could just use a little space for myself right now, right? Something like that. So it does not mean doing these things for yourself to help you experience less or less severe annoyance doesn't mean you don't also take appropriate action and set appropriate boundaries to take care of your sensitive nervous system and give yourself the space you need and let your nerves settle, right? Make sure you do those things. Because when you don't, I like to think when I don't, like I'm the one annoying myself, right? When I'm not looking out for my own mind and doing those things that I've shared today, I'm annoying myself. When I'm not taking care of my body, I'm letting my nervous system annoy me because I'm not taking care of it, right? Or I'm letting my mind annoy me when I'm not taking care of my mind's way of relating to annoyance, right? And I'm the one, this is the good news, I'm the one who can annoy me, and you are the one who can annoy you. So I hope that you will use the suggestions that I've laid out for you today, even if you just use one of them or use all of them, even better, and start really actually helping yourself to not be so annoyed. Start unannoying yourself. Now, there is, of course, a lot more to all of this, including some really empowering work around boundaries, that, it's possible as a highly sensitive person, you may need to do some of that work in order to have less annoyance and irritation and resentment going on. And I will bring you more on these topics. But if you find that you really are having a lot of irritation and annoyance in your experience in your marriage, and you're ready to move out of it so you can just enjoy your life already and enjoy your partner so much more, feel free to reach out and book a consult about coaching with me. Learning how to feel so much more at peace with your emotions and how to prevent all those emotions like annoyance from even arising in the first place is really at the heart of the work that I do when I coach with my clients. So if you're ready for that and to invite way more enjoyment and love and a true deep sense of pleasure into your marriage, reach out to me. You can message me by going to facebook.com/lifeisworthloving, or just email me at hannah@lifeisworthloving.com. All right. Be oh so well.